Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Code and the Coding Coders Who Code It. I'm your host, Drew Bragg, and in a show first, I am joined by two guests. With me today, I have Mike Munroe and Dave Kroondyk from Obelisk. Mike, Dave, would you care to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the company?
Yeah, sure. Mike Munroe, co-founder at Obelisk. We're a Rails consultancy based in the Boston area. Met Dave many years ago. He joined us when we were working full-time together back in 2011. So we've worked a ton together. I'm excited to have him join us today. And yeah, maybe I'll let Dave take it from there.
Hello, I'm Dave Kroondyk. Yeah, I've been working with Mike for a long time. Been doing Rails development since visiting a Pragmatic Studio course in 2008. So that was a lot of fun, long time ago. And yeah, just these days trying to stick with Rails as much as I can. It's the most fun and most productive for me.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be great. I'm super excited to have you guys on and try the two guest podcast. So for those of you who are new to the show, I'm going to ask Mike and Dave three questions. I'm going to ask them what they're working on, what kind of blockers do they have, and if they don't have a current blocker, what's a recent blocker they had, and how did they solve it? And then they're going to have an opportunity to wrap up the show by sharing something cool, new, or interesting they've recently learned or built or discovered, and it doesn't even have to be coding related. So without any further ado, guys, what are you working on?
Yeah, I'll take the lead there. So we wanted to come on today and share an exciting project we've had in the works for one of our clients. They're an EdTech client for many years. We're operating with a platform, web application, native iOS, and Android mobile apps for their clients, initially built on .NET Framework. So actually multiple backends that gets a little messy. It's a project we took over from another team, bit of a rescue project that we took over now a few years ago. So it was .NET Framework, older version of .NET, and then some API endpoints were responding with .NET Core. Front end was predominantly built with Angular for the web. And then on the mobile side, there was a technology used NativeScript. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's similar to React Native. So it's JavaScript. You can pick your flavor, and then you end up with apps built for both that run on iOS and Android. So downside is, I think, decent platform to build from. There isn't as much usage as things like React Native. So documentation is okay. I think it's decent, but their versions change pretty often. But the long story short is we took over this project many years ago. It's a client that we had met. It had a lot of problems. At first, we have some .NET expertise within the team. And so the plan was to kind of get it stable, fix some of the glaring problems that they had initially. But the end goal was to always rewrite it in Rails. And we took on that project last year. And so the big thing we wanted to share today is it's a full rewrite, full stack Rails, utilizing Turbo, Hotwire, Stimulus, hosting it on Heroku. So we're moving it off of Azure, which is very nice. And then also building out the mobile apps, leveraging Turbo Native. So Turbo Native iOS and Turbo Native Android. There's an ETL process that was built as well. That's also built in Rails. So yeah, we're super psyched about it. Myself and my co-founder, we spent a decent amount of time doing the early kind of keep the previous platform moving along, get it some stability. And I couldn't wait for the day that we decided to go down the trail of doing the rewrite in Rails. And we had worked a ton with Dave previously, off and on, since 2010. And so last year, we were all working on another project together that was React and Rails. And we freed up Dave and another senior developer to kind of jump on to this full rewrite. And fast forward some months ahead, we're getting close to launch, hopefully in the next month or so.
That's awesome. Very exciting.
Dave, what are some great things that maybe I missed on the rewrite that are in flight?
The one thing that I think about numbers wise is it's probably a 6+ year old project that two of us developers rewrote in maybe 6 months. Obviously, not quite feature for feature, but almost. Sort of just speaks to the velocity in a full stack Rails environment versus separating out front end, back end, and having to do everything multiple times. So that's kind of my big takeaway.
Yeah. To add on to that, I think it's worth calling out previous team that was working with us at Obelisk to maintain this, my co-founder and I took on this project as like the early rescue, but then we built out the team to support it. For years, it was basically supported with 3 full stack devs, a mobile developer, and then a QA person. So 4 senior engineers were basically keeping this thing stabilized and then adding new feature development and maintenance as we went along. And Tom and Dave and Tom Chen, who was the other senior developer on this, who's another awesome Rails dev that we work closely with often. It's been 2 of them, and they pretty much rewrote the whole thing from scratch, like Dave said, in 6 months. And the plan going forward is to continue with a very small team. It's a smaller edtech company. The budget is on the smaller size relative to other projects that we take on. And that was a big impetus for going down the Rails path, not just because we can do more with less, but that's the platform we want to be building on for all of our clients to a certain extent. So going forward, it will be 2 engineers and 1 QA person. And Dave is kind of, it's 1.5 now. We have him with a junior dev helping out a little bit on the project and still making a lot of awesome, really fast progress, which is exciting to see.
That is awesome. And so whose idea initially was it to go from .NET to Rails? Was that you guys going to them and saying, we want to do this? Or was that them saying, we don't like what we originally chose?
Yeah, we chose that. So this edtech company, as I said, they are a smaller client of ours. And so we also provide fractional CTO services for them. So they're great. They run the business. They do all the sales and marketing and everything else. And when they brought us on, they wanted to hire us earlier on, but the business wasn't big enough. They just didn't have the budget. They did hire a cheaper alternative. I think that they tried their best for a few years. The business was growing. I think the product outgrew the ability of the team that was working on it originally. When they called us, their production system was going down weekly during their peak season, which is end of summer as students are coming on board for the school year. And yeah, that's where the engagement began. Big rewrites are always tough. There's always a lot of gotchas. There's a lot of work that's there that you think won't be there, but there always will be. I think between Dave and my co-founder as well, like we've seen more than a few rewrites all working together. They're tough. And so initially we were trying to find ways of how could we do this in a phased approach, possibly. And it's funny, I remember the early beginnings of this, I slacked Dave one day and said, platform's going to become, that's the product we're working on. That's going to become React with the Rails backend. And Turbo was just starting to, that was the early inclination of what is this thing going to become? And he said, I don't think so. I think maybe this Turbo stuff that's coming out, Rails 7 will be coming out. A lot of this stuff will be stable. I think this is going to be an opportunity to not do the SPA front end with an API backed. And that's a path that we've been doing for many years, but I think across the board, none of us really love. And now there are other opportunities. So Dave, mentioned that, and that sparked the let's keep keeping an eye on Turbo. And as things stabilized and we had a chance to kick the tires a little bit more, we kind of knew we could do more with less. I knew that for this platform, we could use a smaller team. We could save some money on the resources that need to be paid for to keep this thing up and running. And so I went back to the owners and said, we've been thinking about doing this rewrite for a long time. We knew it was coming. I had kind of prepped them. I was waiting for when is the right time for their business to take this on. COVID changed a lot of things. Their business grew substantially as part of COVID, and there was never really a good time during those huge spikes for them to just think of tackling a rewrite. And as COVID calmed down a bit and their business returned to a little bit more normalcy, I went to them and said, I think it's time. I knew that we had the team in place to do it. We had the time from our side to tackle an endeavor of this size. And I was pleasantly surprised that it went so much better than I even expected to a certain extent.
That's always the goal for every project, right? Rarely happens, but it sounds like you're pretty fortunate and got it to be much smoother. And Dave, was this your first first time really using Turbo and Hotwire in a production setting? Or had you done a couple of projects before and said, yeah, this is good?
Right. I think I would maybe think of it as my second major project. using it. I have like a side project that I fool around with. Pretty much started with that, trying to see, I pulled in like Vue component and Tailwind and started switching over to just using Hotwire, where before I had a bunch of jQuery stuff. And that was neat. So then on the first project, I did a similar thing and kind of built out the Vue components a little more and realized, wow, I'm having so much fun. This is so much faster than anything I've done before. That was probably around the same time where Mike was like, yeah, we're going to have to rewrite this project. And I was like, you can use the new Hotwire stuff and it's really nice. So yeah, that's pretty much how that came to be.
That's awesome. Hotwire has been something that I have only gotten to play with in side projects, and I'm anxious to get it incorporated at work, but we have a few Rails upgrades to do. And it just sounds like such a joy to be able to say, hey, we have to do this rewrite. And instead of needing something like React on the front end, we can stick to Hotwire and stay closer to Rails. Dave, have you done a decent amount of React in the past, given that a lot of the projects are React with the Rails API backend?
I think I would say more of my experiences with Ember.js, but even then, what would typically end up happening for me was I'd be working in the back end doing API stuff. I might dip into the front end here and there. If I was on my own, I definitely try building projects on my own, even when it's a faster feedback loop when it's myself, because if I'm trying to like figure out what should the API be, I can just do it and go to the front end and change, update the code for that new API. It still always just felt to me so slow and so much work. And all I can think is I'm just maybe not working on the type of products that would benefit from these split environments, or especially even on your own. You don't need all the extra separation because it's just you. If you've got 20 or 50 developers, maybe that helps because you can kind of split them up. But small teams working on certain line of business apps, it's mostly just forms and HTML, like basic stuff. Yeah, we've been trying to steer away from that SPA concept for those type of apps.
Mike, is this something that you can see a lot of projects in the future starting to leverage Hotwire more rather than React?
Yeah, we're pushing it extremely hard. I think in any instance where someone came to us with something that was greenfield, we would push extremely hard to stay away from the SPA in general. React there's just so much of it out there because it was really, I would say, the only choice for a little while. Relatively speaking, there were some other smaller options that I think some diehards would stand behind. But as Dave said, I think years back, we were doing a ton of work and it was always Ember in front of a Rails backend. And the types of applications we were building at the time, it seemed like that was the only path to take. There wasn't, you could build Rails views, but the JavaScript that was needed to build the dynamic UI that people were expecting, you had to go down that path. I think we really loved Ember at first, but then quickly realized the amount of complexity that takes place where you have a separate front end and a separate back end. Now your state management alone, just that in and of itself is adds tremendous complexity, right? So you're managing state on the back end, you're managing state on the front end. How are you doing it efficiently? What are the thoughts of the framework that we're using in the front end and in the, think of it as quote unquote conventions like Ember.js had Ember data. And there's so much extra complexity there. But that was the path. That was what you needed to do. A lot of the work that we were doing, if it wasn't a Rails backend, then it was a Node or a .NET API. But it was just the front ends and even today, like most of the people we talk to have a lot of React in-house. So we would love to push, and I still try my best. Almost every client I talk to, depending on what their team looks like, this is especially, I think Dave hit on it, right? Like I think if you have a big engineering team, sometimes it makes sense from like a org-driven perspective to break pieces up. And I think that's probably one of the better and primary reasons to do so. That being said, we've always done really great work with teams of 3, 5, and now I'm talking engineers, front end, mobile, QA. You start getting up around 6 to 8 people and the team starts getting big. And so when you start thinking about, can I turn out a really great application with a team of 3 to 5 developers? If you don't need a back-end team, a front-end team, and a mobile team, which you just do that, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I probably have 1 or 2 developers on each of those, and the numbers add up quick. We haven't even started talking about QA. Challenge, though, that we're seeing, and I talk about, like, it's not a challenge on the greenfield side, but there is still challenges for companies who, and I hear this. I actually spoke with a client recently. It's a successful business. They have multiple properties within their online web application. They stretch a few different technologies, but all of the front end is React. The director of engineering is struggling a bit because his challenge today is, I just need to keep going out and hiring more and more senior JavaScript developers, not junior, not even mid-level. He can't stop talking about the amount of complexity that the team needs to handle. And that's not just a React thing. I think any mature software application, you get 3 to 5 years down the road, there's complexity through growth to a certain extent. It's really hard to manage that unless you have a really great team right from the start. It's hard to unravel some of that, though. It's hard. Someone comes to us and says, yeah, I have 3 production apps. I have a production platform today. It's 3 different applications, 3 different slices of what we provide to our customers. It's all built in React. We have 3 Rails or Rails backends supporting these, and they want to go full stack Rails. I think that it's possible, but there's a challenge there. And I hate going back to clients and saying, well, the right path is let's just rewrite a bunch of stuff. That's a big undertaking. We have some clients that are open and looking forward to rolling back some of their React. They've bitten off some taste of full stack Rails and want to do more of that. But there's a challenge to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, completely understandable, especially you're not just changing technologies. In some ways, you're changing the way you build the application. To a degree, there's a sense of like, okay, we build an endpoint and then we build the front end that kind of consumes that endpoint. And then when you get to the turbo stuff, you do sort of rethink how your website interacts. In a way, it's like thinking about how the web used to be, where your form gets submitted and then you receive a response from the server and render it. But it does change a little bit about the development process or how you think about how interactions work. So I can definitely understand wanting to push it and then clients being like, well, but we have this big React app we'd love to change, but there's just so many, unknowns, I guess, because there is that mental shift necessary. I was just going to ask Dave, like, when you were starting to attack this rewrite from .NET to Rails with Hotwire, thinking about some of that change in how the interactions get built out as far as the relationship between the front end and the controller, did you find that there was a manner of thinking that helped you move faster? Was there something that kind of hung you up at first and then once you got into a groove, or did you kind of have it figured out from the get-go?
Yeah, I think the way I tend to approach building UIs like that are trying to do like the simplest stuff first. What I mean is sticking with your basic Rails CRUD flow. So if you have a list of things, you would just show the index action. And then you want to add a new one. You click add, it takes you to a new page. You have the form, you hit submit, you go back to the list. In a React app, you can picture that add button being a lot more dynamic feeling, maybe, where it does something fancy, like maybe it just inlines the form or pops up a small modal or like, any kind of slicker UX, you could call it. And I just try to save those things for later. Take the simplest approach, then maybe we make it slicker later. What's good is like with Hotwire, it's pretty easy to also make that add button more dynamic because you just click it and have it do the turbo frame response or whatever to swap out just little bits of the page. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was just trying to make the point to stick with like almost a dumb flow, something that might take more clicks or whatever. And then once it's all wired up, maybe you can streamline it, see how it feels.
Shocking side effect of doing development like that is if someone has JavaScript turn off, your app still works. What a concept, right? It's like, I remember days where you didn't need to have JavaScript enabled and the websites would still work. And
Yeah, I found that I could also write some of the specs without having to use the headless browser. And I admit that's probably the only client that would have the JavaScript turned off is my regular rack test specs, but not the, I don't know if any real users have JavaScript turned off, but
You also get the benefit of URLs is still a first-class citizen. The native back button works mostly as you would expect at all times, which is a little trickier on the JavaScript side sometimes, although that has gotten dramatically better, at least the tools inside of these frameworks to help manage that.
Right. That was always something that kind of annoyed me when I would have to do any kind of Rails API and either React or Vue front end was I always felt like I was duplicating efforts with my routing. I'd write my routes in Rails and then pretty much rewrote them in the React router or whatnot. And so it was like, there's got to be a better way. Why can't I just do this all in Rails? And you could, depending on the app, a little too much custom JavaScript. But now I'm so excited for Hotwire to be more of a standard just because it's, like Dave was saying, you can use it as much as you need it. And then when you don't need it, just stays out of the way, where React always felt a little like you're using it and you're using it. There's a term for it, but I'm just going to call it incremental improvements. That is such a huge asset of Hotwire for things. And you said you did have clients that are biting off some parts of their app and potentially moving to Hotwire. So do you think that's easier approach than a full rewrite when you're going from React to Hotwire is to just do bits and pieces, or you think it might be a little easier to do it all at once if it allows for it?
Yeah. If I had to choose between the two without constraints, and I think this is why we love this business to a certain extent, right? I think we're all engineers at heart because the constraints are what makes everything hard. Without constraints, I think I would say it's probably easier to just do a rewrite, at least today. Will there be other paths, things that are unknown at this time that might make things easier coming down in the future? Maybe. It's just, I think the paradigm is React aside, a SPA in front of an API and moving to full stack Rails. Doing that in pieces has some challenges, except I would say the way that I would, and this is how I suggest it often to clients that I'm speaking with who are open to taking some of this on, is finding seams that are product driven. So I have this small slice that I could break off and to a certain extent, maybe even treat as a separate app. And now it's really what are the techniques that they're going to use to keep these two apps kind of living in conjunction with each other that the end user doesn't really realize the difference. And there's definitely challenges there. I think some of it is where it gets tough is if these two products are separate enough where they're not sharing much state, then it's much easier. But when you have to share state across these themes or just routing between the two, there's a lot of challenges there. So I would always suggest to bite off a rewrite. I think the other challenge, which is there is an elephant in the room here that I think it's unfair to not discuss this. A lot of clients who have a larger development team, if it's a front end team and a back end team, typically that front end team has been hired. They were screened for their JavaScript skills. What I see more of is there are React developers, JavaScript developers on teams when it's front end and back end split. They may have some back end knowledge, but they're typically JavaScript developers. They're not super jazzed, most of them that I speak with, to start writing Rails tomorrow. Whereas on the flip side, I think it's hard to be, if you're a Rails developer for the past 10 years, even 5 years, 3 years, new Rails developer, it's almost impossible to be just a Rails developer without having any exposure to JavaScript. It doesn't mean that even a Rails developer wants to be, a hardcore JavaScript developer tomorrow. But if you're a front end, React team, front end, Rails API, back end Rails team, and you're going to move away from that, there are some, call them cultural challenges as well. Like your team will probably look different if you're a React shop and going all in, we're going to take our product from React front end Rails API to a full stack Rails. Your team's probably going to look different at the end. Hopefully not. I don't want to speak for all the JavaScript developers, but if they don't want to be a Rails developer, it's probably not going to be the shop that they want to be at when the rewrite is done. So I think it's fair to call some of that out too, that there's just some challenges there that need to be worked through.
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a number of React developers on a team telling them, hey, we're not going to use React anymore, is probably a pretty hard sell.
Yeah.
So the app rewrite from .NET to Rails, you also said they were using native script for their iOS and Android app. And that also got kind of consumed when you did the rewrite and used Hotwire, including Turbo Native, to do the mobile apps. So what was that like?
I would say Dave and I talked a lot about this question. And because for me, what I wanted to push is, I think maybe we could call it more blocking at first. I say we. Dave took on all of the heavy lifting on the iOS and Android side. Tom Chen, who was the other developer, I think helped out a decent amount, but Dave did the heavy lifting here. I'll let Dave get into the weeds, but I think as a blocker question, maybe not blocker, but the biggest challenges we had on this project were, you could say, they're on the mobile side. And I think if I was to summarize the conversations I had with Dave, and even just my general overview of working with clients that have web applications and mobile applications, mobile is another beast. We were just talking about front-end devs and back-end Rails devs. Taking a Rails dev or a small team of Rails devs and asking them to go off and write a native iOS app and a native Android app. And I say native, we should say hybrid, because the thing that we knew that we were going to leverage here is we were going to build, a first-class web application.
It's still native, Mike, fully 100%, absolutely as native as you can be.
We are reusing as much of what was built for the web to simplify and speed up delivery of this application.
Yeah.
And
it's a very small native app is what that means. So there's the turbo stuff and the wrappers around the web views. Sure. Like all that stuff is native. So like it's a native app. It's small. Like the amount of lines of code is not much and there's not like a ton going on. And that's because Turbo is managing most of it through the sessions. Yeah.
But there's a lot of overhead when you go down that path. And Dave is right? So he's calling out that it's native. So you're native. You're a Rails developer who on Monday mornings opening up Vim and watching the code that you write, you're testing it in a browser and you're seeing this stuff come to life. And then, I need to work on iOS. Okay. Now you're in Xcode. Now you're dealing with deployments to the Apple Store. Okay. You have Android. Okay, you're not even in Rails anymore. If you're writing some native code, you're in Swift. Now you have Android Development Studio. You're in Kotlin. So now you're stretching 3 languages. There's challenges just in general. It's a new paradigm that you're developing for. And so really the challenges there is take a Rails dev, and Dave is the one got thrown right into the mobile pool and the water was deep. There was a lot of work, a lot of things to get up to speed on. I think he did a tremendous job. I'm psyched. I'm still even with the challenges that we've had, and let Dave jump in and see which ones he's happy to share, and I can jump in as well. I'm still super excited that this is the path we took. Yeah, there's some overhead, but I think in aggregate, when we come out getting close to wrapping up the release of this project, going down this turbo path and leveraging native iOS and native Android, even you could argue somewhat early, these are frameworks that are still being worked on, stable and definitely usable for sure, but there's still things in movement here. But I'm psyched that we went down this path.
So Dave, when you were first tasked with kind of going from a native script bit of mobile to turbo native and really having to go true native, so Swift and Kotlin, how do you start with something like that? Where is I'm just going to get Hello World running on both? Or did you kind of have enough experience doing native stuff to kind of jump in and say, okay, I've got my framework wrapper area. Now I'm just running web views inside of the mini application?
Yeah, I had 0 mobile experience before. So that might be part of why my opinion is what it is, which if it wasn't obvious already, I borderline hate mobile development. I learned enough about mobile apps to the point where I'll be using a mobile app on my phone and I'll be like, oh, I can kind of see the code that is going on to make this all work. And I hate it. I absolutely just want to only build web apps for everyone. I don't know why people like mobile development. I hopefully won't get like crucified or something for that. But how we started was when we were building the rewrite, we sort of did it with the mind that these web views are going to have to work decently in mobile. So we sort of did it in our browsers as we were building them. But then it came time to like, oh, okay, we actually have to do the turbo native bits. I think the good places to start there are like the Turbo iOS and the Turbo Android repositories have demo apps that showcase like all the various features. And those are things you just open right up in Xcode or in Android Studio, and you can sort of poke around and see how it works. Along with reading the docs for those, I think I would have, in hindsight, spent a lot more time digesting those docs instead of my approach was just launch it and get going. Point the URL at our Rails app and just see how it is. I guess the other things we use Jumpstart, Pro, Resource, and there's a new book, Hotwire Codex or something.
Yeah, Rails and Hotwire Codex.
Yeah.
Codex. I won't pronounce his name well. Ayush Nuwasha or something.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'll have it in the show notes. It's a really good resource.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The problem with that book, we probably should have reached out to him. We were already almost done with the turbo stuff and it didn't come out till December 15. And by the time it came out, I was like, great, let me see how he's doing stuff. So I able to skim through it and I think it was great. I also thought it would have helped a lot because he gives some rundowns on like Swift for Ruby developers, Kotlin for Ruby developers. And that would have been nice. It's pretty easy enough to just look on the internet and you get the feel of them. Swift especially, you can get the feel of pretty quick. To build like the Turbo native app, you don't have to like know Swift in and out. You just got to kind of get the syntax. But yeah, what sucked was here I am again, building APIs in Rails, doing all the views because we had to do native sign-in. So it's like doing all the views, all the registration pages, all native. I'm building these apps twice now, once in HTML and now in iOS. That was a few weeks of work. And then I'm like, I got to do it all over again in Android. Kill me now is just terrible. It's like, there's just so much work to do to make it all work. So it's not fun. Just would rather be doing HTML for sure.
Sure.
I would say in a perfect world, it's tough to get away from having developers on the team that have some depth on the mobile side. But there's also, keep calling out some challenges here. It's Dave and I talked about, there's a lot of great mobile developers that we love to work with inside of our network. They're going to want to do the full native. We don't want to reuse web views, progressive enhancement. What is that? No, you want me to come and work on a project. This is
right
from the scratch. Give me an API. That's what I want to call. So I think we would have loved to hire some mobile developers who are on the 37 Signals team because they get the paradigm here. I think we'll see more of those as the uptake of people using these technologies and we continue to promote it as best as we can. Maybe we'll see some more mobile developers that maybe have jumped from the Rails side. I don't think we'll see Dave doing that, but some others. One thing that I think is cool on the mobile side is especially on the iOS side, you just get some really cool UI right from the native frameworks that you're building with. You can build really cool looking stuff without a ton of experience. You just got to kind of know how to put the pieces together and understand some basic design stuff. But the UI libraries from building something, it's just cool to build something on a phone that everything just feels so great when it's all natively built.
Yeah. Dave, when you kind of finally got over the hump of getting things set up with Swift or Kotlin and we're finally really leaning onto the turbo native stuff and just rendering out web views, did it kind of feel like, okay, cool, I'm over the hard stuff? Or did you sort of still have a lot of rough edges to smooth out?
I think it was when we first got the app uploaded on TestFlight and then I installed it on my phone and started poking around. The initial reaction was, oh my God, this is so awesome. I can't believe we did this. One bit that we have is there's like the native tab bar on the bottom, which the web app doesn't have at all. So it was just super cool, like flipping between the tabs and like navigating around. And it was like, wow, it all works. This is so cool. But yeah, then you kind of start using it a little more and you start seeing these rough edges, like a search form we'll submit the form and then it kind of re-renders the page. But on mobile, it's sort of like advances a page. So you see it like slide over, and now you've got like a backstack, which is kind of, if you search again, now you've got like 2 or 3 backstacks, and it's like kind of weird to like go back when really you just want to go back once. Similarly, I think there's like some forms we have that you submit and they should take you back to the page you were at. But on mobile, it looks like it advances you to that page, and it does. You've got this weird navigation loop going on. It's all controllable. You can control it from the server. You can tell Turbo Native, like, hey, like, don't redirect, don't add one to the stack, like reseed one from the stack. That stuff is kind of like in the Turbo Rails gem. And well, I think it's built into the Turbo Native libraries, or maybe you have to like respond to it yourself. We haven't actually done any of that optimization yet. It's only on a few spots right now. But yeah, there's definitely more work to do if you want to make it nice everywhere.
Okay. In your opinion, still better than dealing with React Native or Native Script or any of the other ways of doing the hybrid? Or is it will be nice when it gets there, still working on getting there?
Yeah, it's way better than doing React Native approach, because in that approach, you're rewriting the app again. We already rewrote it once. We would have to do it all over. We'd have to make all the APIs for every single page and then render them all native. We spent about 6 to 8 weeks getting the mobile apps polished enough. We would have spent 6 to 8 months doing native versions at least. And I don't think I would have been capable of that because I don't have the mobile experience. But I think a mobile developer would have taken them that long. And that would be with me helping them building APIs. So it's like, yeah, it's just not really even an option to do React Native or something. However, speaking of that, there is a new library called like React Native Turbo, which I think is like a slightly, well, maybe it does use the Turbo Native libraries under the hood. I think it does, which that would be great, because what kind of sucks about our approach right now is we've got these 3 repositories. You know, one is Xcode, one is Android, one is the Rails app. You change it in iOS, you got to go change it in Android. You're maintaining like so much extra stuff. With this React Native Turbo library I saw, I think the idea there is you start with React Native, which will let you deploy to both Android and iOS, but only write it once. So we could have effectively cut our work in half. And it just uses React Native to render the native bits that you might have. And it pretty sure use the Turbo Native libraries under the hood, but there might be some issues there still because of how those work and what they expect and stuff. That would be neat to just build your mobile app once and it just goes to Android and iOS.
Well, that was the original promise of hybrid, right? Was write it once and it runs on both places, but you're still dealing with API stuff. If they've got some bridging for Turbo, I feel like that is even more of a step in the right direction.
Like most of the app is still just written once, but it's just the native stuff you have to redo, which there's a surprisingly larger amount of it than you would want. Well, especially for us, we needed native sign-in screens with sign in with Google, sign in with Apple, registrations native. That's kind of like a big chunk of work to do it all native and to make it work with the web too. You're doing everything 3 times there. It would be nice to just do some stuff twice.
You said you were also leaning on Jumpstart Pro for some of the Turbo Native stuff. When you started to rewrite for Rails, was it Jumpstart Pro to get off the ground and running, or were you just using the Jumpstart Pro to kind of, okay, how is Joe and Chris doing the Turbo bridging?
Yeah, we did the latter approach there. So we used the Jumpstart Pro mobile stuff as sort of a reference to see how things worked. And that was awesome. It had a whole lot of things solved, syncing the cookies back and forth through like API calls. And if you sign in natively, like setting API tokens in secure storage and stuff like that. But yeah, for Jumpstart Pro on the web app, it was similar. I hadn't used it before. I had looked at it, maybe just took a look at it for some inspiration and stuff. It has like way more features that we don't need, so we didn't start with it is all.
So Mike, if you had to take on another project like this, where you're taking written in a different stack and you've got the web and the native applications, and now you're going to rewrite it in Rails, I think I know the answer to would you use Rails 7 and full stack Rails, but more than that, what did you learn out of this project that you think you're going to be able to carry over to the next time you have to do this to make it even smoother?
I would say the learnings are on the mobile side. I think that if we were to do this again, I think we would have spent some more time brushing up on tackling mobile, getting some background knowledge in place. And that's mostly just Dave said he was straight up, didn't have much mobile experience. But he raised it earlier. Like, I don't think I can just run out on the street tomorrow and hire, let's call them a mobile full stack Rails developer who is interested and psyched to do some mobile work, but is committed to the quote unquote craft of building mobile apps in conjunction with full stack Rails web app. I think that it's a little kind of jumping back and forth over the fence, right? It's like, okay, great. Settings page. That's HTML. We're not going to bother with that. Leave it. We're just going to render HTML. But what's also great on this project, most of the students that use the product, it's really one workflow that 90% of our usage, and it's on mobile. So Dave referred earlier to there's a taskbar at the bottom. It's really they open the app and they click on one of the items in the taskbar. We have the ability, if we would like, to enhance that flow as we decide, right? So we did such a great job on the web that, a previous complaint with this application, mobile versus web, was that students and staff would complain that the mobile and the web experience was actually pretty different. And so it was a feature that they behaved the same today. We can enhance and add some more native capabilities as we see fit in the workflows that are meaningful. But yeah, I think the learnings here are, the backstory here is Dave joined us full time, myself and my co-founder, Ryan Tremaine here at Obelisk. We were working at Thomson Reuters. Our job internally, and we did this for 5 to 7 years, was basically taking a bunch of old financial services products that hadn't had any technology investment in 10 to 15 years, built on, at this time, really antiquated frameworks. And think old Java, old .NET. Him and I had some experience there from previous times in our careers, and we were moving everything to Rails. AWS was new at the time. So there's some real depth there in terms of taking a non-Rails product and moving it to Rails. Really, the only new stuff here is, which is nice, is we don't need to worry about heavy JavaScript front end anymore. And so it's really diving into, if we can take a product from scratch and the client is up for it, we'll go full stack Rails. But yeah, I think where would I do things better? It's really planning and I think scoping and taking a deep look of what are the needs on the mobile side, and more specifically, what are the things on the mobile side that we do need to do the full native lifting. Dave and I, when we were first starting to tackle the mobile side, we had some conversations about maybe we can just leave the sign-in and registration flow reusing what's on the web. When we started, the requirements of needing to handle third-party sign-ins, Apple sign-in, Google sign-in, quickly we realized we have to do those screens in native. It's software, so we're always planning for some unknowns that are going to impact the schedule. But I think in a future doing this again, I'll do a much better job of earlier on in the process trying to figure out what are the screens that need to be fully native. There is no reusing the web, and scoping and planning accordingly for those.
As a wrap up, you both get your chance to share something cool or interesting or new that you recently discovered or built. It does not have to be coding related. Dave, what's something you want to share?
Yeah, no, I think the cool thing I wanted to add was the Flex library. That's PHLEX by Joel Trapper, I think. So what that is like you're writing your HTML views in Ruby. And why I think it's cool is because it followed the same path that Tailwind CSS did for me, which is the first time I looked at it in examples, I thought, my God, why would anyone do this? But I started actually writing applications and writing code using Tailwind and realized, wow, I'm having so much fun. This is the most fun I've ever had designing pages, like tweaking styles and whatnot. And with Flex, it was the same. I saw the homepage. I'm like, okay, I get it. I've used Vue components a lot with ERB templates. And I looked at the page and I'm like, I don't know, this looks weird. Why would I write all my HTML in Ruby? I was intrigued and I went and tried it one weekend on my side project, and it was the same feeling as Tailwind CSS. I'm like, oh, this is so fun. Oh, wow. I can't believe how nice this is writing HTML like this. So I guess maybe worth a grain of salt because I haven't done much more than a few hours here and there, but so far it's been really fun and I look forward to using it more.
I will +1 Flex. It's been a lot of fun watching Joel kind of build it out. And when he was on Twitter, he's on Mastodon mostly now, but he would tweet quite a bit about the enhancements he's making. It was always such an interesting project. And I admittedly have not actually built anything with it yet, but just looking at it, it does look cool. A quick follow-up question. Since you mentioned both Tailwind and Flex, do you think some of it as to why it's fun and what you chose for the cool, new, interesting is that it keeps you from context switching? Like Tailwind, instead of having to leave and go write your CSS in your CSS file and then go back to your HTML, you're kind of staying in HTML and doing everything there. And Flex, instead of having to leave Ruby or Rails land and then go over to HTML land, you're in that same context. Less context switching feels nicer on the brain.
Yeah, like that could be why it's fun. Like, I don't know why it's so much fun is what I'm saying. And if it's the less context switching, well, then great. I just learned something about my brain.
Drew, I'm a huge fan of anything that cuts down on context switching. So
Sure.
Even the smallest things, talking about ruining your brain throughout the day, just bouncing back and forth from stuff, it's tough. So anytime you can minimize that is a win.
Totally. So that brings me to you, Mike. What is something cool or interesting you want to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to continue to ring the bell. I'm hearing on Twitter, on podcasts in the Rails community, people continue to push, looking to hire junior developers. It's been tough in the industry. I think that seniors and even mid-levels, find jobs, not find jobs, but there's just not enough juniors getting hired. Super psyched. Maybe it's just because there's just more people talking about it recently. I hope continues. We hired a junior dev back in December. We're having great results with it. It takes work. It's an investment by a company to do so, but there's a lot of positives that come out of it too. I would argue you get a great return. Dave worked with us. Ryan and I ran another consulting company back in 2014 to 16 that we sold to a larger company, but that was built on basically almost 60-40 seniors and junior devs. And all of the juniors came out of boot camp. The juniors that I think we would hire today, I would lean towards looking at boot camps first, but we love Rails. We think it's a great choice for clients to build applications. And I do truly believe, this isn't for me, it's not just a cliche. Like, I do believe that you can do more with less. If I was going to build a startup tomorrow, I would choose Rails. And I think it's a competitive advantage that you can do a lot with a smaller team and really move and leave yourself some maintainable code, even not doing a good job of trying to do that. But if companies are only hiring seniors, we're not building the next generation. Going back to the investment, we've been in this game for a long time. I mean, myself and business partner met at a startup back in 1999. We have some strong opinions on not just frameworks, but how to ship software. I think we're really good at that. One small opinion is don't let PRs sit for days and potentially weeks. Get code in, iterate. Small things like that add up and really help you ship code. Those are the things that I want to instill on developers that we're bringing into our team. It's like, I think teaching a golf swing, I would argue it's easier to teach a junior and instill cultural things in terms of what are the important things when it comes to shipping software, aside from Rails or the framework or the library. What's important, even the small things, and getting those things ingrained to them. You spend, call it 3 months to get them leveled up a little bit, 6 months to really get them on board, 12 months, 18 months later, you can turn a junior into easily a mid-level and scratching, senior level skill sets, at least on the Rail side. Maybe not like architecturally, but to me, it's a small investment, but it takes time. You need some level of senior developers available to mentor. But the thing I wanted to share that I think is cool is that was a problem. I think it is still a problem hiring juniors, at least in the Rails vertical, but sounds like people are pushing to try to change that. And I think that's super cool. And we're trying to do our small part as well to keep publicizing that and do our part.
I agree with all points you made, not just hire juniors. I think that there is a lot of good initiatives and pushes to do a better job with that. We definitely have not figured it out. We haven't fixed the problem, but like Andy Kroll doing First Ruby Friend, that mentor-menteeship, that is huge. That's awesome. Joe Maslotti has spent a ton of time with Rails devs getting that reverse job board going. And then in addition to that, really what you're doing, pushing the, hey, we need to bring on junior devs. We need to get them hired. We need to get them the experience. We're going to run out of senior devs if we don't keep leveling up our juniors. Even at RubyConf Mini, the end of past year, there was a whole workshop on running an internship for juniors and getting them leveled up. And it's awesome to see how much the community has embraced, like, hey, we have a problem hiring juniors, so we're going to solve it. And we have a lot of really awesome people working on it. And I encourage anybody who is in a hiring position to definitely look at juniors. And the other point you made, that if you were to start a startup today or in the near future, like Rails being a great choice, I think it's an awesome choice. And if for no other reason other than the energy that was at Rails SaaS, Andrew Culver put on such an amazing conference, not just because it was a little bit different in tone and the way that he was presenting it, but just there were so many founders there and so many people working on SaaS products. And they were all super passionate about what Rails was giving them to allow them to boost their business. So I think that in conjunction with, frankly, awesomeness coming from Hotwire in Rails 7, just makes Rails just an increasingly great choice. And I'm really excited for the future of Rails.
Couldn't agree more.
So thank you guys for coming on. This was awesome. I've never done 2 guests before, but you guys made it incredibly easy and had a lot of great stuff. So Mike, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Dave. Where can folks find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm Mike P as in Paul Munroe at Twitter. That's my handle. LinkedIn, same handle. Also Mike at obelisk.com. And Obelisk can be found at obelisk.com, OBLSK. Yeah, and we're a Rails consultancy. So someone needs some help building a new product or tackling an ambitious Rails project, please reach out. Love to chat with them.
Dave, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, I guess I switched to Mastodon as well as a lot of other folks. So I'm on ruby.social and it's at Dave Caro, which is Karo. I'm pretty much Dave Caro everywhere on the internet. That's been my handle since maybe 8th grade, maybe younger. I don't know.
AOL?
No, I had
way
Juno.
back in the day.
Juno.
Oh,
friend.
geez. Going even further back.
Email. I love Juno. I was a subscriber.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. This was an absolute blast. I feel like I could have both of you on again to pick your brains about a number of different topics. So hopefully we can get you guys on again, talk about some of the cool things that we talked about now and get a little bit deeper. For now, I think this turned out to be an awesome episode. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Perfect. Thanks for having us, Drew.